The floor of the Academy combat ring did not merely support weight. It translated intent to a scrollic like Reth-Sulkai. The fine-tuned seismic sensors embedded beneath the composite plating acted as a secondary nervous system. Standing at the edge of the observation tier, he felt the heavy, rhythmic thrum of the 4 Krovok senior cadets as they paced their side of the square. Their footfalls were tectonic, each strike of their clawed heels sending a jagged spike of data into Breath's primary manipulators. Their scales were already darkening, shifting from a dull olive to a deep obsidian sheen that signaled the hardening of their natural armor. Breath looked down at the digital betting slip trembling in his grip. The interface was flickering, a cheap, low-rent display hacked together by the Krovok to facilitate the afternoon's entertainment. It was a mundane piece of data, yet it carried the weight of the room's arrogance. 200 credits had been placed against the human. The primary wager, set by the lead antagonist, Corvs, was stark. The Deathworld Girl would hit the floor in under 8 seconds. Beneath the observation deck, something shifted. It was not the heavy impact breath expected from a Class 12 inhabitant. It was a lightness, a rhythmic tapping that felt less like a soldier and more like a heartbeat. The human entered the arena. Her name was Freya, though the intake forms designated her as HNF-17. She did not march. She did not adopt the heavy, wide-stanced prowl of a predator. Instead, she moved with a loose-limbed, almost liquid grace that made Vet's tri-hinged jaw click once, then twice involuntarily. She was humming. It was a low, melodic vibration that sat at odds with the predatory darkness of the Krovok. A low hum, then nothing. She stopped at the center, her presence tiny against the armored giants. Would you have stayed or would you have run? Because as the betting clock began to tick, Freya didn't look like someone who was about to lose. She looked like someone who was finally home. Freya stopped at the center of the ring and looked at the 4 reptilian giants towering over her. She didn't seem to see the sharpened ridge spines along their forearms or the way their scales were clicking as they locked into combat configuration. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her thin fabric training pants and pulled out a small curved strip of vulcanized polymer. It was translucent, slightly bitten at the edges, and entirely unimpressive. With a casual flick of her wrist, she popped it into her mouth, settling it over her upper teeth with a practiced twitch of her lip. Breath's optical sensor zoomed in, capturing the detail for his trainee log. The scanner struggled to categorize the object, the light dancing off its curved surface. Finally, the system spat out a tentative classification. Oral structural reinforcement material, vulcanized polymer, purpose unknown, possibly ceremonial. It was a strange, small thing. While the Krovok were encased in full jaw plates and reinforced cranium guards designed to withstand the impact of a kinetic hammer, the human had chosen a single piece of plastic. It raised a question that Breath could not shake. A cold splinter of doubt vibrated through his insectoid frame. If she wasn't protecting her face from their fists, what was she preparing for? Corv stepped forward, his armored chest expanding as he let out a low, guttural hiss. The sound was designed to trigger the ancestral fear of any species with a spine, a frequency that echoed the death rattle of 1,000 different prey animals. In the gallery, a Pell student went completely rigid, his elastic skin tightening until he resembled a statue of polished stone. 8 seconds, little mammal, Corvs growled, the sound like grinding stones. That is the gift I give you. After that, the floor. Freya didn't growl back. She didn't even drop into a combat stance. Instead, she looked toward the arena's audio technician, a nervous Veneth whose bioluminescence was currently a frantic, pulsing violet. "Hey!" she called out, her voice bright and terrifyingly calm. "Can you play something with a bit more kick? I need to get my blood moving." A few moments later, the silence of the arena was shattered. It wasn't a roar or a scream, but something far more invasive. It was the sound of earth, heavy metal music, the deep, distorted growl of electric guitars, and the frantic rhythmic assault of a drum kit began to bleed through the high-fidelity speakers. In the gallery, 3 different species immediately reached for their waxy canisters of ear membrane sealant, their bodies recoiling from the chaotic resonance. To the aliens, it was noise. To the human, it was a tempo. Freya began to stretch. She didn't do the standard military lunges or the stiff isometric rotations favored by the Academy. She dropped into a full split, her hamstrings pressing against the cold floor with an elasticity that defied the Skrillex understanding of bipedal anatomy. Then, with a sudden burst of momentum, she transitioned into a handstand against the arena wall. She moved her legs through the air in slow, controlled arcs, her body a coiled spring of muscle and bone that seemed to find the music's jagged rhythm. Breath watched her, his jaw hinges clicking rhythmically in the freeze state reserved for apex threats. He looked at the betting slip again, the flickering light of the display showing the 8-second countdown. It suddenly felt less like a prediction and more like a frantic hope. He looked back at Freya, who was now upside down, her goofy, lopsided smile appearing on her face despite the polymer strip in her mouth. She looked like she was performing a floor routine for an audience of ghosts. The Krovak moved. They didn't wait for the official signal. Corvs barked a command, and the 4 armored cadets began to close the distance, their darkened scales absorbing the harsh arena lights. They moved like a closing fist, confident that the tiny, humming creature in the center would break upon contact. The arena did not explode into violence. It dissolved into choreography. Corv's charge was a wall of muscle and obsidian scale, a blunt force instrument intended to end the match before the heavy metal track could reach its first chorus. Freya did not brace. She did not even raise her hands to cover her face. Instead, she inhaled a single sharp breath that seemed to expand her chest. And as the lead attacker's armored fist reached the space where her head had been a microsecond before, she simply wasn't there anymore. She moved like smoke. It was a back handspring that looked more like a celebratory tumble than a tactical evasion. Her hands barely brushed the floor as she flipped through the air. She landed softly behind the second attacker, her movements liquid and frighteningly precise. Before the Krovak could compensate for the sudden vacuum in front of him, Freya reached out. Her touch was light, almost casual, as she caught the second attacker's elbow and redirected his forward momentum with the grace of a dancer leading a partner. The Krovak tumbled forward, his own massive weight and the kinetic energy of his unchecked aggression turning into a weapon against him as he collided with his brother in arms. Their armored scale plates shattered with a sound like tectonic plates grinding together in a deep subterranean cave. The 2 giants crashed into the reinforced arena wall, their darkened scales cracking like parched earth. Breath watched from the observation deck, his tri-hinged jaw clicking in a frantic staccato rhythm that mirrored his internal panic. The Voronath medic on standby was no longer just flickering. He was a strobe light of emergency crimson, his bioluminescence washing over the arena in waves of alarm. Freya came to a halt. She stood in the center of the ring, her loose-limbed posture returning as she looked at the remaining 2 attackers. She didn't drop into a crouch. She didn't snarl. She simply looked at them and performed a slow, deliberate blink. It was a predator's dominance signal. Breath felt it in his own marrow, the instinctive biological recognition that the small creature in the center of the ring was the most dangerous thing in the room. The 2 remaining Krovak felt it too. They didn't decide to retreat. Their bodies simply moved backward, their scales vibrating with a high-frequency tremor they couldn't control. How could she know? The answer lay in muscle pretension. Freya wasn't guessing where they would strike. She was reading the microscopic shifts in their armored plates before the nerves even fired. When the 2 Krovak finally lunged in a desperate simultaneous triple strike, she slipped between their attack arcs with the ease of someone walking through a doorway. She positioned herself where their momentum was at its weakest, a ghost in the machine of their combat training. "Oh, was that the test?" she asked, her voice cutting through the distorted guitars of the music. "I thought it was the warm-up." An elder Skrillex in the gallery whispered a phrase that Breath's translator struggled to process. "I've only read about this in extinction records." The match ended not with a finishing blow, but with a realization. The medbay sensors had finally synced with the arena's internal scanners, and the data was flooding Breath's handheld. He looked at the numbers, his secondary heart skipping a beat. Human bone impact tolerance. 740 newtons per square centimeter. Krovok armor fracture threshold, 340. Freya hadn't been fighting to survive. She had been fighting to restrain herself. The medical report, filed before the buzzer even sounded, was a cold clinical autopsy of a massacre that hadn't quite happened. It noted her body temperature, a steady, lethal 37 degrees Celsius that would have cooked most of the spectators. It noted her ability to throw objects at speeds exceeding 150 kilometers per hour. But mostly, it focused on the polymer strip in her mouth. The ceremonial artifact wasn't there to protect her from the Krovok. The Voronath medic realized it first as he watched the way her jaw muscles corded with the force of a hydraulic press. She was wearing it to protect her own teeth from the sheer, bone-shattering power of her own clenching reflex. She had brought protection for herself, not from them, but from the recoil of being human. For months later, the arena smelled different. The heavy metallic scent of Krovok aggression had been replaced by something sharper. A lingering trace of human sweat and ozone that made the senior cadets flinch when they crossed the threshold. The betting rings had vanished, replaced by a quiet, reverent fear that bordered on worship. In the Academy's central evidence locker, the mouthguard sat on a sterile white tray alongside 4 cracked Krovok scale plates. It was no longer classified as a ceremonial object. The new brass plaque beneath it carried a simpler designation: Deathworld Combat Preparation Artifact. Breath Sulkai still visited the locker sometimes. His jaw still clicked faintly when he looked at the polymer strip, a phantom reflex from the day he learned that some species don't need armor to be invincible. He watched the human cadets move through the halls now, their goofy smiles and loose-limbed walks no longer looking like a weakness. The morning suns of the Academy station caught the translucent surface of the polymer, casting a long, distorted shadow across the polished floor. It looked less like a sports tool, and more like a warning left for the next generation of apex predators.